Scott Pendlebury from the Collingwood Football Club. You're listening to the Coaches Panel.
This is Patrick Crouch from the Carlton Footy Club. You're listening to the Coaches Panel.
Max Gorn, Melbourne Football Club. You're listening to the Coaches Panel.
Number 48 in the 50 most relevant. Yeah, we are 3 days down, and this is the third player in my 50 most relevant for 2025. The players, I believe, ultimately, a subjective list, who I think are the most important and relevant players to have a conversation about in SuperCoach, Dream Team, and AFL Fantasy for 2025. Joining me on this episode to talk about a player that, from an ownership percentage, is so highly owned. But why is Saad El-Hawli in so many of our sides? That is why we've got Liam, the host of the Free Kick AFLW Fantasy podcast. Mate, it's good to have you back on the podcast, but for your first time ever in the 50 most relevant.
Mate, it's first time, long time. Glad to be on and talk about someone that, as much as he's a bit of an unknown, being a Bombers man, I may have, just a couple of extra tidbits to help everyone out.
I think that's why we've got you. In fact, I know that's why we wanted to have you on this podcast. Based on the ownership percentages across all of the platforms, it's 1 in 3 to 1 in 2, depending on the format you play. He's in our team. We've strongly seen him in a team reveal, but why is Saad there? Well, we're going to talk about that. Bombers player, defender, mid, no averages or games data or top scores from an AFL perspective yet, because he's yet to debut. It is rarefied air. We get a player yet to debut that makes the 50, but such is his relevance, we had to put him in there. He's priced right at that space of, basement price is unfair in some of the formats, but he's in and around that marker. He's a 230k rookie in AFL Fantasy, just a touch under 120,000 in SuperCoach, just a little bit over the $210,000 marker in Dream Team. Let's talk about Saad as a player, though, because he is relevant for not just the price point that he offers, but the scoring power, because this guy's got some real talent about him, real versatile option, can play wing, can play half back. And then when he gets that opportunity to go forward of centre and impact the scoreboard, Liam, this is actually a really special player that structurally could do a lot for the Bombers heading into 2025.
Yeah, he's someone that unfortunately we were cruelly robbed of a debut last year. So for those that don't know much about Saad, he was drafted in the mid-season draft in the middle of last year, off the back of a run in the Northern Bull Ants of 8 games in 2024, where he averages 100. He's had basically 26 touches, 6.5 marks, 3.5 tackles. Man's kicked like 4 or 5 goals as well. He was in ripping hot form, and then gets drafted at pick 13 by the Bombers in the mid-season rookie draft. He plays 2 games for the Bombers VFL team. In the second one, he's kicked 4 goals. He's basically brought this Bombers team that was down by 40 points against Carlton back into the game. They're back ahead. He takes an incredible mark inside forward 50 and does a syndesmosis injury. Cruelly robs him of a bloke that we were just dying to play. This is around about the time the Bombers were playing Nick Hind back off halfback. Saad El-Hawli looked like he was just absolutely set to make a debut for the Bombers. And now he should be fully fit. He played some more VFL games at the back end of last year whilst he himself was trying to get fit. And we saw Archie Roberts come in, someone I'm sure we'll talk about how they fit together later. I definitely think he's going to be high on the Bombers' expectations to play best 23 football this year. And so on that basis, he's just such an intriguing prospect.
There's AFL fantasy tons in the VFL, both at the Essendon level and in the Bull Ants team, as well as from a SuperCoach perspective. So while not coming in as a pure rookie draft in the sense of a Jagger Smith or an O'Sullivan or a Draper, his price point across all the formats, he is cheaper than all of these guys that we would be historically looking at to be able to generate that high-end cash and deliver some significant value to us. I'm not too concerned about that injury. It feels like it's real freak injury. There's no real high narrative that I can see, Liam, from junior days and VFL days that this is an injury risk.
The mark was that athletic that he's landed like on one foot because he's gotten up high. It's a freak injury. I just think he was late to football. That's why we're only really getting to him now. He's only played 31 games in the VFL, and in his first year, so he started off at Werribee. He's actually still playing in the Western Football League. So he's not exactly got this like incredible footballing school football pedigree. Funnily enough, a graduate of the Saad El-Hawli leadership mentorship program.
Yeah.
So clearly got that halfback pedigree just ingrained upon him. And I know I talked about some AF scores, but for those SuperCoach people, he comes back, like I said, after that injury in his final game of the year in round 21 of the VFL season. He has 27 touches and 10 score involvements. Should give you a relatively good indication of the type of player that he can be. And then he's playing on a wing at that point in the Bombers VFL team. So I'm obviously more of an AF man myself, but just know that this guy clearly gets in some good areas to make impactful stuff. And I'd be pretty comfortable saying he's got some SC scoring potential as well.
He does, because not only has he got that high footy IQ to get into damaging space, when he gets the ball in hand, you don't get a 10-score involvement game without being a strong executor of the ball by hand and by foot. So while
super fit too.
He's been leading the club, depending on who you speak to and some of the preseason notes, like he's right at the top of that high-end fitness levels in terms of, I think he's been top 5, top 3 in a lot of their different trials and training elements. So
he's been someone that gets talked about when they do mid-session running stuff. It's him and Pidge McGrath who are consistently finishing inside the top 3. I don't think he finished top 5 in the time trial, but I do believe he was top 10 based on just reports that I read about on Twitter and Blue Sky. So he's clearly got the fitness. The injury isn't a concern. And if you've watched any of his highlights, he's got speed. He's 184 centimetres. So he's still got decent enough size. I'd almost call him a pretty prototypical winger in the way that he's shaped, the way that he's fit. It's just that we've not seen him at an AFL level. So this is all just based on what he looked like in the VFL and just watching bits and pieces at training. So obviously I'm really keen and really high on him, but it does come just with that small caveat of we are projecting a bit here.
Yeah.
We've really got to put that into context.
We don't know what we don't know, and there is some opportunities that we need to now talk about Essendon, but there is a cascading of variables that now come from this. He's certainly more the outside type player, so expect a high scoring from transition rather than stoppage. And so that link-up scoring across half-back and wing is if he's going to crack any position at Essendon, it's more than likely in those two spaces, more so than anywhere else. But there's a couple of spots that have opened up over the last 12 months. Multiple retirements have hit Essendon. I'm alluding to a Jake Kelly, probably more a surprise than I think a lot of people would have expected, but 20-odd games
Not
last
disappointed,
year.
though.
No.
Not disappointed.
As a Crows supporter, I can vouch for that for you. And then a Dyson Heppel, probably a little bit more disappointed from the legacy of player he's been for Bombers, but again, almost 20 games himself. And look, it's probably harsh, but Hind arguably took the games from Saad last year. But again, these three players are now out of the mix. Where does he get these opportunities? One wing feels like it's pretty locked up from an outside perspective, looking at Essendon with a Dersma holding that spot down. There's three, arguably two guys out, is probably fairer to say, in Heppel and Kelly. Does he get naturally into one of those spots? Because if he does, man, there's 5 or 6, maybe even up to as many as 10 players in the Bombers lineup that their fantasy and football relevance just cascades left and right. Yeah.
So I think the first question to ask is what position would I say is more likely to play in to start the year? So doing a bit of research, reading some Bombers articles about his kind of exit interview for their media piece. It's not actually his exit interview. He talked about being kind of in the back end of last season, even when he was injured, with Xavier Dersma in the wing meetings and really trying to learn from Dersma and the way that he plays the game. And I think that Dersma, for as much as not everyone at Port Adelaide loved him when he left, he definitely does a lot of what the Bombers need, which is accountability in defence. So that's where I think he's more likely to play. But obviously Jake Kelly and Dyson Heppel have spend time on both wing and halfback. So the question then becomes who plays opposite Dersma, with the obvious caveat as well that Dersma was injury affected twice last year. So it could be, let's call it 1 3/4, like 1 1/4 spots are available on the Bombers' wings. The biggest question comes down to Nick Martin and where he plays. I think he's the key that unlocks a lot of what the rest of the Bombers are doing. I need to state at the moment that he is currently training in the midfield. And I would say that this is my extremely untrained, like from a exercise science perspective, he's got the midfield shoulder bulk preseason training going at the moment. And for those, it's just a look. There's a little bit of extra pop to the shoulders, like he's been told you need to build your width because you're going to spend some time inside. But we also know that he's a very natural half forward and had some massively impactful games. I'm thinking particularly the last quarter against Melbourne. I don't think that at the beginning of the season, the Bombers will be looking to start Nick Martin on the wing because I think they know that what that looks like. And we also know that he's extremely impactful and his player ratings in the kind of after about round 6, when he started to get his kind of started to feel settled across halfback, he was one of the Bombers' best players from a player ratings perspective. But we already know what he looks like on the wing. So I'm expecting it will probably be half forward, midfield, or half back that he starts the year. The next question then becomes, all right, who are the other options to replace Kelly and Heppel? I had a bit of a brainstorm, and there are a lot of options. So Archie Roberts finished the last 4 games of last year on the wing, played pretty good. Now, he was good from a fantasy perspective because he was a kick-dominant player, and I liked his hand-to-foot speed. And overall, I'm a big fan of a left-foot kick out of halfback, being one myself. But I think I don't want to overstate his position and how locked he might be in that team. The Bombers were injured across the wing and halfback at the back end of last year. Then we kind of get into someone who started the season as a full-time midfielder, probably drifted a bit more outside than I would have liked, and that's Sam Durham. So per Jaden Popowski's stats and his kind of positional groupings, Sam Durham actually came up as a wing towards the back end of last year. He'd lost some of his CBAs, and that came in part because someone like a Dylan Shield had gone inside. So spending a little bit of time outside. I'm hoping and I expect that he will start back in the midfield again, but he has been a winger in the past. Then we get into the failed draft pick category. So we've got Nick Cox, Ben Hobbs, Elijah Sardis, who have all at times played in kind of midfield wing type roles. I don't think any of them will play wing this year, or at least I sincerely hope not. I think at this stage, Elijah Sardis going into his 3rd season, he's looked terrible on the wing. He's not a natural winger. He's not very good in that kind of space. His kicking's atrocious. He needs to be in at the context. If he's going to play in the Bombers' best side, I think he has to be in the midfield.
Agree.
Nick Cox maybe plays in defence. I think the name to mention otherwise is Jackson Pryor, who's one of our only actual player additions who played AFL footy last year, who we got from Brisbane. He's everything that Kelly wasn't, is the way that I think about him, in that he is an intelligent player with a good kick. Probably not the world's most athletic, but he is still also a fit athlete. So I definitely think he's one who will be high in the Bombers' considerations to replace one of Kelly and Heppel. Now, there are some others to talk about. I'm just going to say don't get sucked into Zach Merritt or Dylan Shield. Zach Merritt's not playing across halfback, and Dylan Shield is playing halfback in the 2s.
Agreed.
If he's playing halfback for the Bombers opening round, I am going to have some serious questions and be probably presumed to be furious. So I've now given you a sense of how many options there are at the Bombers without even going through all of them.
Yes.
Why I think it's necessary to go through all of it is I think that Saad El-Hawli, if he plays in the way, and I think for all intents and purposes, and this kind of confirmed by euphemism, he was going to play after that Carlton game.
Yeah.
He got 10 coaches' votes. He had looked amazing in both of his first 2 games. I think he was coming into the Bombers side, and I think they're extremely keen to get him back in based on the way that he's been training this preseason. And I think he's probably someone who naturally starts on a wing straight away. It's his first full pre-season, and we know that he can definitely ply his trade on the wing. They like his speed, they like his athleticism, and they like his ball use. I like his ball use at the very least. I can't speak for the coaches on that front.
This episode is brought to you by Atlassian. Atlassian makes the team collaboration software that powers enterprise businesses around the world, including over 80% of the Fortune 500. With Atlassian's AI-powered software like Jira, Confluence, and Loom, you'll have more time to do the work that matters. In fact, Atlassian customers experience a 25% reduction in project duration per year. Unleash the potential of your team at Atlassian.com. Atlassian.
I think that for all intents and purposes, he'd be odds-on favourite to at least be one of the 3 wings that are picked in opening round. But it's got some instability to it.
Yes.
There are a lot of options floating around there. If he has some down games, maybe they do want to try and get Elijah Sardis at least into the team, try and get him some more midfield minutes, but he rotates off the wing. Same applies to Ben Hobbs. The Bombers took a handful of kind of defender halfbacks in the draft. Zach Johnson, an example.
Yeah.
There is some instability there. So he's going to be super relevant to start the season. It's just that I definitely think there's going to be some low job security. It's going to be a low job security because of how many players the Bombers have to throw through there.
Yeah. The 50 most relevant, and the reason Saad's such a fascinating player to put in this spot is because you've just listed, it feels like a quarter of the AFL list for the Bombers.
Yeah,
but
pretty much.
It's literally, if he's on the wing, well, now Martin is probably down to one of 2 or 3 spots. And if Martin's not a wing option and not off half back, well, he becomes almost irrelevant for us in our starting squads, and we're not going anywhere near him because that half-forward mid-roll is probably more impactful as he could be. Well, his fantasy and SuperCoach scoring falls right away for us. If Sardis is in the midfield, well, all of a sudden, well, this unlocks not a cash cow, but a breakout candidate that's shown at VFL level and juniors. Massive SuperCoach and AFL Fantasy scoring pedigree. If Jackson Pryor gets this kick in and supportive distribution role for the likes of Ridley, Redmond, and co off that back line, because Saad's up in the midfield through the wings, we're there. So this is why he sits in this 50 most relevant, because is he guaranteed best 23? Absolutely not. I think he's a leading candidate for that opening round spot. But his selection or non-selection impacts so many others in this Essendon lineup, and which is why the 50 most relevant isn't just the 50 most important players or the 50 that MJ wants to select. It's the compound variance that can come through this, and he is so critical to whether or not we look at Martin, we look at Sardis, we look at Hobbs. I think he has zero impact on a Parish or a Merritt's relevance for us. But even to an extent, do you look at a Ridley? There's so many guys that move around based on this one player.
I think it's kind of, he sits kind of 2 IC on the Bombers kind of decryption key below Nick Martin.
Yes.
Because I think Nick Martin kind of determines the whole thing. He sits at the top. He's the big unknown with what he's capable of as a pure inside midfielder. I think he's such a good distributor by foot going inside 50, and his kicking can be elite, such that he dictates everything. But sitting right behind him is El-Hawli, alongside an Archie Roberts, who I think they really did. They were surprised by how good he looked as a later round draft pick last year. We probably want some youth that only we've trained, and we've got them caring about only our defensive priorities, which Bombers' defensive priorities in space and defensive pressure has been atrocious from some of the players that have now left. And it's been made more evident by how good Xavier Dursman has been. I wouldn't be shocked if one or the other of Roberts and El-Hawli gets picked in opening round, which kind of brings it on to the next thing. We get a free look.
Absolutely. We
get a community series, we get an opening round, and we get to watch. And I would also just I say that, it's a free hit. It's not the fantasy score that I'm most going to be looking for. Look at where he runs going back without the ball.
Yeah.
Because the wing is the most difficult defensive position to play outside of, playing as a very young key defender, because you have so much space to cover. Look at how well he drops back, how often it feels like he's the one who's being hand-passed over the top. He's going in for tackles when he shouldn't, or he's not drifting back and there's marks dropping behind him. It's his work in defence that will almost certainly dictate how good his job security is.
Yeah.
Because I ultimately think that he can score if he stays in the side.
Yeah, I agree. Opening round, the community series, role trumps scoring. You see those two things. Okay, he might pop a 90 but have a rubbish role. It doesn't matter. It might be junk time at the back of the community series. It doesn't matter. Don't ever get tripped up by that. And because the points matter in opening round, but they don't impact in the sense of the score you don't gain, but the price movement does. I'm much more interested in what is that opening round matchup? Where does he sit? How do they use him in transition? Well, we know as Zach Merritt is so key to their ball movement. Do they trust when Saad is in and around the ball zone? How does that structure them up? So that is the thing I'm really fascinated to watch. Opening round, community series, that intra-club match that will probably sit with another team like a Geelong or something like that. These
I
are
think
the things
typically the Western Bulldogs.
Yeah, that's true, actually. Does he run with a Caleb Poulter all afternoon? These are the things I'm wanting. And then the beautiful thing is, as Liam's mentioned for us, opening round, we get a free look. If it's strong and favourable and he's then named in round one, he's probably one of... Is there two rookies that we could say we'd feel, knowing it's the first handful of days of January, so it's dangerous to do. But Liam, it does feel like Saad and Toby Travalia at St Kilda probably early days feel like the rookies that if we had to put someone on field, these feel the two at that low end price point where we're comfortable as a community to select.
Yeah. That's definitely where I'm going to be looking. I think maybe we can have a conversation about Bo Allen.
Sure.
But I just can't speak for how likely he is to play round one.
Yep.
I think Travalia comes in. Riley Bonner played umpteen games last year. And they clearly like having multiple ball users across halfback. We can talk about the player that actually determines if he plays, which is Jack Sinclair, I'm sure, at another point.
Yep.
But I think El-Hawli really sits in this. I'm comfortable in defence, probably having him on field at D6.
Yeah.
And that kind of goes to what if he plays, what does he average? Just looking at what the players who played on the wing last year averaged, Jake Kelly averaged about a 60.
Okay.
Dyson Heppel, 76.
Yep.
Archie Roberts averaged an 85.
In
David Dersner, an 82. Nick Cox. I'm going to call it a rough 55. I did some kind of rough, vague maths because he was kind of a bit of wing, probably more in defence. But let's call it a 55.
Sure.
El-Hawli's a far better footballer.
Yes.
Or fantasy footballer.
Yes.
Than Nick Cox. I think he's capable of averaging something in the 60s, which gets you through 8 weeks.
And that's all you
side.
need. Yeah, that round 4 when it's the Bombers and the Hawks, you can navigate that real easy across the formats with best 18, even easier in SuperCoach where you've got an extra on-field spot in SuperCoach and Dream Team with the flex positions added. So you're not worried about missing that at all. I'm with you. We're going to learn a lot through the preseason, but is he relevant for our classic sides? Absolutely he is. Draft is interesting though, Liam, and we know so much draft about a player's position or where they go on draft day is to a degree linked with where you do your draft. Because if Saad has that awesome role and scoring in community series and your draft is straight afterwards, it's going to be probably substantially different, the price point you pay, whether or not even you draft him, as opposed to if you're an early February selection. So let's do what we know, the variables we know. Where do you see him going on draft day as a Bombers fan that believes he's got some good chance and high probability of debuting opening round? Where would you pick him on draft day?
On draft day, if I was doing it, in January, he's a waiver wire pickup in a single season league.
Agreed.
I just think that there's too many unknowns. I think that if he's not picked in opening round week 1, he is someone that is, as soon as he does get picked, he's a watch. He's a watch to pick up because I think we saw at the back end of last year the fact that Archie Roberts can come in as a pick in the 40s and average that 85. And I think he had a score above 100. That tells you that the Bombers can incorporate young halfbacks and wingers pretty quickly and have them up to a pretty good scoring standard straight away. If he scores well, if let's say he scores a 75 and plays well, community series, good role, opening round, I think he's someone who's right at the back end of your draft. If you're doing 180 picks, 200 picks, he's in the last 15, 20 for me.
Yeah, I'm pretty similar with that call too. All right, mate, you've been an absolute superstar. We loved having you on some of our strategy roundtables last year. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you on your first episode of the 50 Most Relevant. We promise you it will not be your last for the 2025 season. Liam, where can people get in touch with you across social media? And also, if they're wanting to play AFLW Fantasy next year, where can they keep in touch with you and what the guys at Free Kick are doing?
Well, you can find me all across social media at Liam AFLW Fantasy. And if you are keen on playing AFLW Fantasy for the first time, you can find all of the Free Kick and my content over on the Free Kick Twitter. But also we write articles for the AFLW themselves. So if you go across to the AFLW Fantasy Hub, which is the same as the men's, but if you go across when the season's starting, you'll find a whole bunch of stuff from us, all of our podcast episodes, a whole bunch of articles to get you sorted. And, you know, we're a very open door. We're a very opening community because we know that it's pretty small by the standards of the AFL community. So we're always willing to help out and give advice.
That's awesome. If you missed any of those places where you can keep in touch with Liam or the Free Kick team, all the details are in the description of this episode. While you're there, you can get in touch with the Coaches Panel crew across social media, get your hands on some Coaches Panel merch, and also join our Patreon. It is there where they are getting a ton of bonus content right throughout the preseason. They get access to some stuff that we just don't publicly make available. And if you're a breakout or a premium tier supporter, you actually get the audio podcast of the 50 Most Relevant a day ahead. So they're already sitting pretty in at number 47. In just 30 seconds, though, I'm going to give you a clue about who is at 47. Let's see if you can figure it out, friend, as you're listening or watching. But before I do, don't forget to subscribe to the channel on YouTube. If you've not watched one of the 50 Most Relevant episodes yet, you need to do so. Make sure you subscribe and tell us in the comments section below, are you picking Saad or not? Is he on the bench? Is he on the field for you? Defender, mid? Or is he not even on your radar before this episode? Let us know in the comments below. If you've listened to us as an audio podcast and haven't given it a 5-star rating, you're really missing out. Make sure you do that, and you can keep in touch with us and everyone else that's appearing in the 50 Most Relevant with all the details in the description of this episode. All right, number 47, friend. Can you guess who this is? We love to look at the back end of a year and try to extrapolate it out and go, well, person X did this over the last 3, over the last 5, over the last 10. They had that role change, and therefore we've got embedded value into their average, their price point, and we could get ourselves an absolute bargain. The player at number 47 in the 50 Most Relevant sits in that perfect breakout spot where you're not projecting in hope that should the role align, they might be able to score. This is a player that for a chunk of time at the end of 2024 had the role and scored like a premium. The good news is, in 2025 across your formats, you do not have to pay for it. But who is he? Will he hold the spot? Maybe that's the bigger question. We will unpack that tomorrow on the 50 Most Relevant.